talking about dryland water. And we've talked about some of this before, so some of it's a bit of a recap, but I'm going to especially apply it to Robert's place because that's where I'll be planting. And I am concerned about water there. So here's my current thinking. Robert's land, you know, he's got 40 acres, and Robert, maybe you could, I'm just going to not try to really draw it what it really is, perhaps. But there's a little bit of a drainage way here. There's a building, there's a fence line that cuts something like that. And then there are several irrigation drainage channels. This is where several other colored pens would be great. So there are, in a sense, swales. They're diversion channels. There's an irrigation canal that comes into the property. Actually, it probably comes in right at the corner, just about. And at the moment, it looks like these will run until July. So I'll have water until July, and we can, what the current system is that you do sheet irrigation where you block the stream flow here and all the water spills over and irrigates this part of the pasture. That's called sheet irrigation. And then you open it up and block another one and it'll sheet this, you know, so you have several sheets going across. It's relatively inefficient in terms of water use.
Do those go to other properties? Or those
they're going to probably, that's what we don't quite know. It appears that they just peter out. And where does the extra water go? Does it just spill off down the field? Or do you just shut your valves off here so that once you've irrigated the area, you don't leave it running all the time. You just run it when you want to. Is probably, I think, so maybe when you put the flag, the whole stream is flowing over here rather than, because when you put it, you're putting a dam in, so all the water is going to go in. Usually it's done in several segments of a field. So these are slightly off contour. Now there's a big house here with a lot of roof area, and it's got several awnings coming off of it, and there's going to be a couple greenhouses. This is on grade. This is all sloping. The whole ground is sloping. There's no flat. And so there'll be greenhouses facing on the south side, which is this side here. There'll be greenhouses below the place. So there'll be a lot of roof area. So right now we've just tilled some ground up here, and we've taken a triangle of ground, which is probably right here, and tilled it up and shoot it up, and it's heavy pasture grass. And this is Bitterbrush hillside, which is a sign of dry landscapes. Okay, so this is a 10-inch rainfall zone. I only have water until July, and this has, excuse me, there is a well here, a 13-gallon-a-minute well. And then there's another one over here, which may be, let's say, 20 gallons a minute. We don't know for sure. And I want to plant a lot of stuff this year. So I'm really worried about planting stuff out in the field that I can't water. So I don't want to do that this year. So I'm going to do this in a stepwise manner. This year I'm going to put in a garden, a kitchen garden, you might say, and some hedgerows and berries, etc., below the house, and irrigate it from the well as needed once the spring rains stop. And so I can keep that small area alive. I'm going to plant in this area here about 100 on this bank. As this ditch goes across the ground, or diversion channel like a swale, it has a berm in front of it. So I'm planting the berm because the berm is an area of extra amount of water, because the water that's flowing in the ditch periodically and sheeting across the field, it makes it wet, especially in the swale, and the berm soaks up a lot of the water, and since it's taller than the landscape, it's got a bigger soil reservoir to hold water. So I'll have water later in the landscape there than anywhere else. So I'm going to plant trees and shrubs on the swale bank. And if I need to later in the summer, I'll be able to draw on this irrigation well to water those trees so I keep them alive the first year. The first year is the year I'm most likely to lose things in a dry land situation. If you can get it through the first year and the first winter, you're almost always going to have continued success. They will establish. So the first couple of years I'll supplement the water if I need to. I'm guessing that eventually I'll never have to water the trees on these banks once they're established. There's another set of there's another berm bank here, and there's actually somewhat of a one at the edge of the property here, not the edge of the property, but the edge of the field. The key line in this particular landscape.
That property has kind of a key line where the water concentrated.
Well, right here there's a rock pile and an old willow tree, and down here are a couple apple trees, and you can see a depression in the ground. So this is an old drainage system here, which has probably been obliterated by the field work in the past. This has all been hayed, cultivated and hayed and grazed for a long time. So right here is a great spot that you could put a pond in here. So there may be another key line up here, but it's certainly one of those key places, a place you could put a pond in. Too bad I don't have a photo for this next time. So one of the things that the property's got is that this is a big rock pile here. The sign that the willow's growing here in a 10-inch rainfall zone in a field without irrigation, you know there's water down there. So there is water here, and it's also feeding the apple trees. Now, I'll just mention an apple tree right now. Okay, so if you go up to that trailhead at the end of the Orange Street here by the freeway, if you go up a ways, just a short time after you cross through the fence, if you look uphill, you'll see an apple tree that's established on the slope in a bit of a draw there. And the apple tree is really gnarly. That's a dry place there. It's growing well. Probably an apple core tossed out, or a bird or some kind of seed started there, and it's established. And now it's a lot of dead wood on it, and the lower parts of it are real formidable. It's like you wouldn't just go climbing up into the tree. It's a real thicket. And in it, there's a magpie nest. And when I was there just the other day, the magpie, mama magpie or papa magpie, was gathering little bits of downy bark to take into the nest. They have a nest that's like a closed-in area that you go into, like a room. And they need a special habitat. Usually it's hawthorn, but there's not so much hawthorn up there now. So the apple tree is filling in for the hawthorn. It's non-native, it's invasive, but it's filling the same niche, the same function in the landscape. It's producing food, pollen, and nesting sites for magpies. So and it's in a dry area, and it's doing quite well. So we can. The goal then in a dryland landscape is, where do you find those special niches to get those fruit trees, native and non-native, established in the system? And so you can pick what you want to put in there. But you, in a sense, work with what you have. So this apple tree's sparked that idea. Now there's a lot of rocks here. My first thought was, look at all those rocks. I can use them for rock mulch, because I'm into rock mulch. But I did realize that the rocks there were covered in lichen. They've been there a long time. They sort of had prior occupancy rights. And so I didn't want to disturb them. Plus, they're currently serving the purpose of mulching the willow tree and providing a lot of habitat. And so the area under those rocks, once again, is extra rich and has a lot more moisture than anywhere else in the field around it. And so, but Robert's property has got rock piles. Here's the road coming in. has rock piles at different parts of the field. So every one of those rock piles I view as a real resource, because we can come up and we can plant trees and things in the landscape, and by rock mulching them, or a combination of rock and fiber mulch, we can keep the trees alive without irrigation. So my goal in this is to eventually forest more bands of the field at any rate, or lines of the field depending on depressions. Here we have that classic system like Jeff Lawton told us yesterday. We have that feature in the landscape already. The water lines are there with the berms. So we're just going to augment it. But at any rate, I want to get a lot more trees and shrubs in here. I'm especially excited about planting, and so is Robert, of planting some things in the Bitterbrush area. It's relatively undisturbed habitat. Bitterbrush are nitrogen-fixing shrubs, and they have a deep rooting pattern. So I know that the soil is going to be useful here for a lot of deep rooting plants, trees and shrubs. So looking at that Bitterbrush, I look for what are the analog species that that will give me more value that I can stick in there. One thought that comes to mind is mountain mahogany, which is a native evergreen nitrogen-fixing rose family, the same as the Bitterbrush, nitrogen-fixing nitrogen fixer of the rose family, because hardly any roses are nitrogen fixers, but these are. So I want to put in trees at wide spacings in with the Bitterbrush and mulch the heck out of them. I'll probably do fall planting so that they have time to establish during the winter, and the first year or two I'll supplemental water them as needed, if needed. I probably would the first year or two, I wouldn't be surprised. But the goal is that then this becomes not just Bitterbrush, but a mixture of Bitterbrush. I would put chokecherries, service berries, and currants are three things for sure I would put in up there that should succeed. And probably some crab apples, pie cherries, a few other things. You know, we need a species list for that. Good question. A lot of them, some of those things the deer don't eat. So the ones that the deer will eat, like the crab apple, I'm going to have to cape it for the first couple of years until it gets out of browse height, and then I'm safe. But they love serviceberry. They aren't so fond of chokecherry though, and currants they'll also stay away from. So it gives me two of the three there at any rate. So deer tolerant in that there are a lot of deer in this system. We're going to have to deer fence this area here. If in the future, let's say, there's a lot of controversy on the reservation over water rights right now, as in most of Montana and a lot of the arid west, there's a lot of fighting over water. And right now, this is coming from this is on the reservation. The Indians are reserving, they're getting more rights than they probably had in the past, or are about to, it looks like. And they could cut off that irrigation. I don't know what the water rights are on that, Robert, but I'm proceeding with this plan as if Plan B, or that water isn't available, because after some time, right now it's been using for irrigation. I don't think it's been irrigated for how many years? 15 years. Amazing. Well, that's amazing that these fields are doing so well as they are, because it has a heavy sod. And when you have sod, it takes more water to raise a sod than it does bunch grass. As things get drier, sod grasses drop out of the system and you end up with bunch grasses. So this shows me that there's a good water retention. There's a pretty deep reasonable topsoil, reasonable drainage. This is some of the best soil actually in the Hot Springs area, or it's right up there. So eventually, I'm going to want to have a lot of deep-rooted perennial plants in the system with rock mulches, and raise other kinds of mulches as needed to get these things established. If a drought year comes along, I've got a lot of mulberries in there. Let's say I got some apricots. Maybe I even got a few peaches and some special things that are just, we're about zone 5 here. If a really drought year comes along and it's going to be a really tough year, I might have to go out there and say, okay, I'm going to cut some of these trees down. Or if I have them at the proper spacing, I might prune the heck out of them that year and do a really heavy pruning to really reduce the amount of moisture that they're going to need to survive that year. So you can adapt them a little. You have some chances there.
At what point do you make that evaluation that it's going to be a hard drought?
Well, you'd probably well, you want to get it before, probably do the pruning before they've expended a whole lot of energy growing leaves and stuff. So you might want to make that decision in late winter, February, March, before they burst into bud. I would say you'd probably do it probably before bud burst. It would be, well, it might be based on a couple-year drought. Usually, it ain't 1 year that's going to cause me to go to that extreme. We're talking about a multiple-year drought, probably a low snowpack. And you say, well, we're crossing our fingers, we'll get a good spring rains, but it looks really bad. What do we do? You don't plant the annual garden maybe that year. So you have to really hunker down. Right, we're in our 3rd year, well, looks like our 3rd year of decent water. I remember when we talked about dryland, I said sometimes you have the situation after multiple years of drought that the soil is bone dry for 20 feet down, let's say. And then you have some wet years, and the first year it gets 2 feet down, and then the next year the water sinks to 3 feet down. The next year maybe, it's going to take a while to fill up all the way back down to that dry, before you hit the so-called groundwater again, if there's groundwater down there. And so sometimes you have a wet, all the year's fall, winter, spring's moisture is held in the soil, the first 2 feet of soil, and below that it's dry. And so that's why you want to have good test holes. I'm surprised to hear that, because in my digging up there so far, I haven't encountered anything. And you just dug a 6-foot, you're way down, 6-foot trench. It was wet all the way down, but you're at a further down the field. So that's a good point, is that you should be monitoring your soil column for moisture. And of course, different properties may have a whole bunch of different soil types. So you have to look at that. If things get really tight, I can take part of that field and do the summer fallow, soil fallow 1 year, total fallow, and the next year grow a crop on it. Remember how I described to do that at Treebeard's place? You keep all the weeds down for 1 year and just keep it cultivated, so you have a soil mulch above all your 2 feet of capped water. The next year you get another 2 feet, now you got 4 feet. Now I have enough water I can grow a 1 year of crop. I have to save 2 years of water for 1 year of crop. That's probably, I hope I wouldn't have to do that on this site, but it's one of the options I have at my disposal when I look at the whole thing of growing food on this site. You have to have good quality soil with good granular structure. If it's dust, it will blow away, but if it has a good granular, crumbly structure, it'll stay in place.
Can you mulch that sometime?
You could solidly mulch an area for 1 year, but you have to do that after the rainfall is sunk in. I could mulch the soil so heavy that the rainfall never hit the soil. It would just stay up in the mulch, and your ground would stay dry. So you have to strip the mulch off during the rainy season. And of course, you can't say, oh, God, I got a storm coming today. I'll cook mold and pull all the mulch off. And, oh, it didn't really rain. I'll just put it back. Oh, looks like it's going to rain again. Okay, it rained. Now I push it all back. That get old after a while in a very big area. So, but you can do it. In other words, mulching is, the timing is really important. Okay, so here's our slope going down. They dug out a ditch, and they put the soil up here as a berm. Actually, the berm in size of the ditch has been filling in over time, so it's actually more like that, a small ditch and a big berm. And so, here's our regular soil profile. So now I've got, I've got 3.5 feet of soil here, where I've only got 2 feet here. So holding extra water. And this is extra because it's right next to the swale. It has more organic matter and more weeds and grass than anywhere else in the landscape. It's tough. It's tough to knock through that. I had to use my scalper to knock a hole, to cut it, to get a hole to plant a tree. I can't just plant a tree. It's like one of the heaviest sods you ever dug mowed in your life, and you can't just plant a tree. So it takes a lot of work to knock that out.
Where did you put the tree in that profile?
Right here, not on the top, just on the lower side.
How much sod did you remove? And did you mold
About that big. I haven't even planted it. I just made some of the scalps. That would be a good work party. Anybody want to come and scalping party? Sounds bad. You can plant trees on the uphill side. I'm choosing to do it on the downhill side because I have that berm there, and that's that extra depth of soil I'm after. Plus, the water tends to go downhill, so there's going to be a little bit more water here than there is right uphill. You do get a lens of water. Remember, as the water sinks in, when it's held in there, it sinks in and makes a big lens, but the lens tends to slide downhill a little bit more than uphill. And so I've got an especially big lens of water right here.
So that tree can eventually shade that whole thing too.
Right, as this grows up, it will then, shade the area, and it'll be a hedgerow on contour, or almost on contour. So remember in Jeff Lawton's thing, here went the water line, and boop, came up all the trees behind it. Well, that's what I'm doing, is I'm planting that, I'm putting all those trees in the system.
What sorts of trees?
Chokecherry, carragana, serviceberry, currant, black locust, mostly fruit bearing, Rosa rugosa, mostly fruit bearing. All the things that I'm offering for sale here, I'll be putting in there. I eventually my goal eventually is to add enough thorny things so that we can do some weaving and laying of the hedge in here so we can have a deer-proof fence out of the deal. So I'm looking for multiple functional elements. It's, food, it's windbreak, it's deer fencing. American plum should be hardy here, and I've had mixed success with it. It seems to be horribly susceptible to leaf curl in my experience, almost everywhere I've been. So I bet there's better plums. Mixed success. But
Nice
we might be able to.
It's nice and thorny, right?
It's relatively thorny. All the plums that are seedling are pretty thorny. And there's a lot of plums, so someone should do a research project. What are all the plums you can grow here? There are many, many species in the U.S. Which ones are the most drought tolerant and would be good here in Montana? And you notice they form thickets, just like we talk about black locust thickets. Plums, or at least most plums, are thicket forming. You'll find them right here in town. They get to be gnarlier. Again, make a good deer fence with a little extra work. You can grow figs in a greenhouse. Here's a trick to grow figs outside. It's a special trick though. A guy was growing figs, and I say, okay, so here's our fig tree, and its roots are down here. The fig tree top will die every winter here. So in some cultures, they'll get under here and dig and partly sever the roots, and really until they've cut enough roots that they can lay the whole tree down. Part of its roots are still attached, and then mulch the whole thing really heavily so that the winter frost won't kill it. And then next year they push it back up and pack it in again and stake it. You'd have to be staking it at that point, and it would make figs. There was a guy in Richland. He planted his in a huge pot on hinges here, and so when the winter came, he had a big trench here. He just pushed the whole tree into the hole and then covered that over. So that's a really cool trick. And Elliot Coleman in Maine, he has railroad tracks. And he has this big greenhouse canopy mounted on the tracks, on this carriage. And so in the winter, in the summer when it's nice and warm out, he just pushes that off to one side, and all his plants are out there in the sun. And then in the winter, he just pushes the greenhouse back over it. So you could do that with your figs too, so that they get to be outside part of the year. Another trick is you make a great big planter container. You put wheels on it. You have it in the patio during the summer, the good part of the year, and it's going to start frosting. You just push the thing back into your sunroom in your house. So you have a mobile fig tree. Fig trees love to have, I wouldn't say love, fig trees produce extra heavy when their roots are constrained. The plant says, oh, things are a little tough, I better make babies. So a plant, sometimes stressing a plant will help throw it into production. So reducing its root ball size tends to make it produce heavier and earlier than it otherwise would. In fact, some people, what they say, oh, that darn tree hasn't started bearing yet. It's like you get a leather belt out and you just go and whip that, give it a good spanking. Whip that trunk. And you bruise the cambium. You don't cut it. Another technique is you actually take a razor and you cut a ring around the tree. You kind of girdle it, but you don't go all the way through the cambium. You just like cut, it's just a thin razor cut, and the tree jumps and heals over that. But that shock of that bark damage will oftentimes throw it into bearing too. So those are tricks for early bearing. Some people wrap them, put a bunch of straw and then wrap corn shocks or whatever and then wrap it with cardboard. The thing to remember though when you do any of these things with this wrapping, laying down and stuff, and I mentioned this for blackberry canes and for grape canes, that's another way how you keep your blackberry canes and grape canes. You take them off the trellis, put them down next year. You could have a hinged trellis, which would be even slicker, or you could take them off the trellis. But the problem with all that, you create this nice mulchy warm place with nice straw, and it's a great place for mice habitat, and so you can have them girdle or injure your trees or kill them. So you have to really monitor for mice, and you may have to do mice control in those kind of situations. Yeah, I've seen lots of people grow figs in climates like this in a greenhouse. Figs are actually a good choice for a greenhouse temperate tree.